When your mind tunes beyond ordinary reality. Nikola Tesla, revealed. This, the night of January 8, 1943, was freezing in New York. In room 3327 at the New Yorker Hotel, an 86-year-old man was breathing heavily, alone, surrounded only by papers and a dim light flickering from the lamp. Nikola Tesla was dying, but it wasn't death that scared him. It was what he had discovered 3 days earlier, something that would make all of humanity question its own sanity. He looked down at his shaking hands and whispered into the void, "They'll think I've gone crazy, but I saw it. I saw beyond." That morning, while the city slept, Tesla wrote his last note, not about electricity, not about inventions, but about mental frequency, the most dangerous discovery he had ever made. And when he finished, he tore the page in half, because he had understood something terrifying. There are things that the human mind should not be able to perceive, and when you learn to tune in beyond the ordinary, the whole world turns into something else. 3 days before that final moment, Tesla was sitting at the table in his room, carrying out an experiment that no one knew about. It didn't involve machines. It didn't involve wires. Just silence, controlled breathing, and absolute focus. He called it inner antenna tuning. For years, Tesla had noticed that his mind was capturing things it shouldn't. Voices that no one spoke, images of places he had never visited, sensations of events that had not yet happened. At first he thought it was crazy, but Tesla was a scientist, and scientists don't ignore patterns. They investigate. So, that January night, he decided to test one final hypothesis. What if the human mind was, in fact, a receptor? What if thoughts were not created inside the brain, but picked up from an invisible field around it? He took a deep breath, he closed his eyes, and for the first time in his life, he stopped trying to think. Instead, he just tuned in. What happened in the next few minutes would change everything. First came silence, a silence so profound that it seemed to suck the sound from one's own heart. Then a subtle vibration, as if the air around him had become dense, electric, and then Tesla felt it. It wasn't a thought, it was a presence, as if there was another consciousness near him, not in the room, but at the same frequency. He opened his eyes, scared. The room was empty, but the feeling remained, and the more he focused, the clearer it became. It was like listening to a conversation in another room. You don't understand the words, but you know someone is speaking. Tesla wrote everything down, every detail, every second, and it was at that moment that he realized he was not alone in his frequency. There were others tuned in, people spread across the world who, without knowing it, operated in the same vibrational range, and most disturbingly, they could feel each other. In the following days, Tesla began to map this phenomenon. He discovered that when he entered that mental state, he was able to capture information that was physically nowhere to be found. I perceived intentions, fears, desires of distant people. It was not telepathy in the mystical sense. It was resonance, like two tuning forks vibrating to the same note. When one plays, the other responds. But then came the discovery that made him tear up his notes. Tesla realized that this tuning was not neutral. It altered the reality around it. When he focused on something with absolute intensity, events began to line up in impossible ways. Too many coincidences, unlikely encounters, as if the universe is responding to the frequency of your mind. And then, he understood the danger. If the human mind really is a frequency transmitter-receiver, then what most people call reality is just the dominant collective frequency. And those who learn to tune beyond that range, those who vibrate differently, begin to see another layer of existence. Tesla called this the vibrational veil, an invisible barrier that separates the ordinary world from the real world. And crossing that veil had a price, because once you tune beyond, you can't go back. The normal world starts to seem false. The people around seem asleep, and you find yourself alone on a frequency that no one else can access. That's why he tore up the papers, not out of fear of science, but because he knew this discovery would destroy anyone who understood it before they were ready. Now, 82 years after Tesla's death, something is happening. People around the world are starting to tune in unintentionally. No training, without intention, as if the Earth's vibrational field was changing. And these people are feeling exactly what Tesla felt: loneliness, confusion, and the terrifying feeling that they see something they shouldn't. If you're watching this right now and something inside you recognizes this sensation, perhaps you've already begun to cross the veil. And if this is your case, you need to listen to what and Tesla found out before he died. Because what comes next will explain not only what is happening to you, but why it is happening now, at this very moment in human history. If you feel like this story is touching something deep inside you, subscribe to the channel because what comes next goes beyond anything you've ever heard about mind, reality, and the true hidden power within every human being. Tesla was not the first to cross the veil, but he was the first to understand that it wasn't a gift, it was harmony. In the days leading up to his death, he began revisiting memories he had buried for decades, memories of when he was still young, working in the laboratory in Colorado Springs in late 1899. At that time, Tesla was obsessed with wireless power transmission, but what he never told anyone was the real reason for this obsession. One night, while adjusting the high-frequency coils, something inexplicable happened. The equipment began to emit a low, rhythmic, almost hypnotic hum. Tesla felt pressure on his head, his hands tingled, and then, for a brief moment, he came out of himself, not physically, but consciously. For 3 seconds, he later timed it, Tesla experienced a brutal expansion of perception. He saw the laboratory from above. He felt electricity flowing through the walls like rivers of invisible light. And scarier still, he felt the presence of something watching back. When he returned to his body, he was on the floor, breathing heavily. The equipment had burned down, and Tesla swore never to do that again. But the seed was planted, because that night, he understood something that science still didn't admit. Consciousness is not confined to the brain. She is a field, and fields can be tuned, amplified, and transmitted. Over the next few years, Tesla began to notice patterns. Whenever he entered states of deep concentration, especially during his long nighttime walks around New York, he picked up information that came from nowhere. Entire projects appeared complete in his mind, solutions to problems he wasn't even trying to solve, as if you were downloading data from an external source. He wrote everything down and tested, and it worked. But there was a dark side to this. Tesla began to realize that he wasn't the only one tuned in. There were others, and not everyone used this ability to create. Some used it to manipulate. It was in 1901 that he had his first direct encounter with what he called the vibrational antagonist. Tesla had just lost funding for his most ambitious project, the Wardenclyffe Tower, which would transmit free electricity to the entire world. J.P. Morgan, the tycoon who financed him, abruptly cut off the funds. The official justification was commercial unviability, but Tesla felt something different. The night he received the news, he was alone in the office, brooding over his anger and frustration. And then, in that vulnerable emotional state, he unintentionally tuned in, and he captured something. It wasn't a voice. It was an intention, cold, calculated, like a stream of ice running through your mind. And the message was clear. You can't free energy, because free energy means lost control. Tesla froze. It didn't come from inside him. It came from someone. He got up, walked to the window, and looked at the illuminated city below. And for the first time in his life, Tesla felt afraid, because he understood that there was an invisible war going on, a war of frequencies, and he had become a target. In the following months, strange things began to happen. Documents disappeared from the laboratory. Assistants resigned without explanation. Investors who had promised support disappeared. And whenever Tesla tried to understand what was happening, he caught the same icy presence in the background. It was then that he realized there are people who have learned to use mental tuning not to create, but to destroy, to block, to silence. And these people operated in secret, not with guns or laws, but often. They knew that thoughts are energy, and directed energy with intention creates results in the physical world. So they used that to maintain control, to ensure that certain ideas never gained traction, to ensure that certain minds were never heard. Tesla called this group the dissonance, not because they made noise, but because they vibrated at a blocking frequency, like a signal jammer. They didn't need to attack you directly. All it took was to saturate the field around him with doubt, fear, and confusion. And his mind, upon realizing this, began to sabotage itself. But Tesla was stubborn and brilliant. So instead of giving up, he decided to do something radical: study the enemy. He spent years observing how these forces acted, how they identified targets, how they neutralized threats. And he discovered something shocking. Most people they blocked progress. I didn't even know I was doing it. They just vibrated at a frequency of fear, scarcity, and control. And this vibration, amplified by millions of sleeping minds, created a dense, heavy field that literally prevented new ideas from taking shape. Tesla realized that the true antagonist was not a person. It was a collective vibrational system, a dominant frequency that kept humanity trapped in a loop of survival, consumption, and obedience. And anyone who tried to tune in beyond that, anyone who tried to vibrate in creation, freedom, and expansion, was immediately rejected by the system, not out of malice, but due to incompatible resonance. It was then that Tesla understood the true nature of the veil. The veil is not a physical barrier. It is a barrier to consensus. Ordinary reality exists because billions of minds unconsciously agree with it. And when you tune beyond, you step outside of that consensus. You become invisible to the system, but it also becomes visible to something else. And that's what Tesla saw 3 days before he died. He did the final experiment. He entered the deepest state of tune he had ever achieved. And this time, it didn't stop at the first veil. He crossed, and on the other side, he saw something that made him tremble. There were intelligences there, not human, not divine, just others, operating at frequencies so high they seemed to be beyond time. And they were waiting for human minds that would learn to tune in, because there was a message that needed to be conveyed, an urgent message. And Tesla was the first to fully capture it. The message was simple, but devastating. The field is changing, and anyone who doesn't learn to tune in consciously will be swept away by the dominant frequency until they lose their identity. Tesla came out of that panicked state because he understood that humanity was on the verge of a vibrational divide. Soon there would be two types of people, those who tune in consciously and those who are tuned in by external forces. And he knew he wouldn't have time to teach this to the world. That's why he tore up the papers. That's why he died in silence. Because I knew that the information would only be understood when the collective frequency was ready. And now, 82 years later, something is happening. People around the world are starting to wake up to tune in, without understanding why, not knowing how to stop, as if the Earth's vibrational field was accelerating, forcing humanity to choose. Tune in consciously or be tuned in by the system. And if you're feeling this, if you're realizing that something has changed in your perception, that the world seems different, that you no longer fit in, then you've already begun to cross the veil. And what follows will teach you exactly what Tesla discovered about how to protect yourself, how to strengthen yourself, and how to use this attunement without being destroyed by it. Tesla spent the last 15 years of his life doing something no one realized. He was preparing, not to die, but to leave a map. After that terrifying vision, after understanding that humanity was on the brink of a vibrational divide, Tesla made a decision. I would no longer try to convince the world through inventions, because he realized that technology without consciousness only amplifies chaos. Instead, he began training himself like never before. Every morning at 5 a.m., Tesla woke up and practiced something he called mental calibration. He sat in absolute silence and did a simple but powerful exercise. He observed his own thoughts without reacting to them, like a scientist observing particles under a microscope. At first, it was excruciating. His mind was racing in 1,000 directions, concerns, memories, fears. But Tesla was disciplined, and little by little something extraordinary began to happen. He realized that thoughts don't come from within, they come from outside. It was like tuning into a radio. When you are in low frequencies, fear, anger, resentment, you pick up dense thoughts of scarcity, danger, separation. But when you raise the frequency, through silence, conscious breathing, pure focus, you catch different thoughts of creation, solution, expansion. Tesla wrote everything down, and he tested it on himself over and over for years. He discovered that there were 3 layers of mental attunement. The first layer, where the majority of humanity lives, is the consensus frequency. Here, you capture collective thoughts, what everyone thinks, feels, and believes. It's safe, it's comfortable, but it is also limited. You will never come up with an original idea here. It will only repeat what already exists. The second layer, where Tesla began to operate, is the frequency of creation. Here, you capture possibilities, solutions that do not yet exist, invisible connections between seemingly separate things. It is in this range that inventions, art, and profound insights happen. But it's also where you start to feel alone, because few people live here. And the third layer, the one Tesla crossed 3 days before he died, is something completely different. He didn't have a name for it, but he described it as the frequency of the source, a place where there are no thoughts, just pure knowledge, as if you were directly connected to the intelligence that organizes the universe. And it was in this third layer that Tesla received instructions, not in words, but in instant understanding, as a complete information download. And the message was clear: teach those who come after you how to pass through the veil without getting lost, because soon, the choice will no longer be optional. Then Tesla began to codify this knowledge, but not in books, not in formulas, because I knew that anyone who needed to understand wouldn't look in obvious places. I would look into experiences. He spread clues, in interviews he gave, in seemingly random phrases that he dropped in conversations. in numerical patterns that I obsessively repeated. The 3, the 6, the 9. They weren't just numbers. They were frequencies, vibrational keys. But Tesla also did something more subtle. He began to test the mental field around him, observing how different thoughts affected physical events. And that's when he discovered something that would change everything. One day, Tesla was walking down Fifth Avenue, deep in thought about energy transmission. He was vibrating loudly, totally focused, no distractions. And then, something strange happened. A woman walking in the opposite direction stopped, turned, and shouted, "You! I saw you in my dream last night." Tesla was paralyzed. I didn't know that woman. I had never seen her. But she insisted with tears in her eyes that he had appeared in her dream, talking about electricity and light. This deeply disturbed Tesla because it meant that your mind, when tuned to a high frequency, was leaking into the collective field. Other people, especially sensitive ones, were able to sense his presence. He spent months investigating this, and he discovered a frightening pattern. The more you tune in beyond, the more visible you become to other tuned-in minds, and also for those who disagree. It was then that Tesla understood the true danger. If you learn to vibrate high but don't learn to protect your frequency, you become a target, not physically, but energetically. Other minds, conscious or not, begin to connect with you. Some seek help, others seek to drain, and the dissonant ones, they seek to neutralize. Tesla realized that he needed to develop a method of vibrational shielding, a way to operate at high frequencies without becoming vulnerable. And it was then that he rediscovered something he already knew, but had never consciously applied. Silence is not the absence of sound. It is its own frequency, and it is the most powerful frequency of all. In the following years, Tesla did something radical. It stopped broadcasting. He stopped trying to convince. He stopped seeking recognition. Instead, he entered a state of pure reception, like a perfectly aligned antenna, just picking up, no interference. And the quieter he became externally, the more powerful he became internally. He realized that true power is not in broadcasting your frequency to the world. It's tuning in so deeply that the world begins to resonate with you, effortlessly. It was in this state that Tesla spent his last years, isolated in the Hotel New Yorker, no fame, no money, but vibrating at such a pure frequency that he was able to access layers of reality that no one else saw. And it was exactly this silent preparation that allowed him to make the final discovery. 3 days before he died, Tesla noticed that the veil was thinning, not just for him, but for everyone, as if the Earth's vibrational field is accelerating, forcing humanity to awaken. He understood that it was no coincidence that he was alive at that moment, that it was no coincidence that he had spent decades training his mind, because it would be one of the first bridges, one of the first to cross completely and return with the message. And the message was urgent. The field is changing, and anyone who doesn't learn to tune in consciously will be swept away by the dominant frequency until they lose their very essence. Tesla knew he couldn't teach this directly. The world was not ready yet, but he knew that, in the future, there would be people who would start to feel the same way he felt, people who would start tuning in without understanding why, and these people would need a map. Then, in his final days, Tesla did something that seemed insane. He sent the information out into the field, didn't write, didn't keep it. It simply vibrated knowledge at a frequency so pure that it would be recorded in the invisible field, like a message buried in the ether, waiting to be picked up by whoever was ready. And before he died, he whispered to the void, "Who need to know, will know," because frequency doesn't forget, and when the mind is ready, the tuning will happen on its own. Now, 82 years later, something is happening. People around the world are starting to get this message, without knowing where it comes from, without understanding how. Just feeling like something inside them has changed, that a door opened, that a new frequency is available. And if you're feeling this right now, if something in this story is resonating with a deep place within you, then you've already started tuning in. And what comes next will reveal what Tesla saw on the other side of the veil, the truth he tried to protect, and the choice that each awakened mind will have to make. In the early hours of January 7th, 1943, Tesla entered the deepest state of attunement he had ever experienced. It wasn't planned, it was inevitable. His body was weak, the heart failed, but the mind was sharper than ever, as if the proximity of death had dissolved all barriers. And in that moment, effortlessly, he crossed. Not the first veil, not the second, but something beyond. A place where time did not exist, where past, present, and future coexisted as a single vibrational wave. And that's where Tesla saw it. He saw human history not as a line, but like a cycle of frequencies. entire civilizations rising and falling as the collective consciousness tuned in or out. And he saw something that made him tremble. Humanity had crossed this point before, and every time I crossed, a choice was made. And this choice divided the species. Some chose to elevate, learn to tune in consciously, become active creators of reality, and they disappeared. They didn't die. They just stopped vibrating at the same frequency as the rest. They became invisible to the consensus. Others chose to resist, stay at the known frequency, in the safety of the collective, and those remained. But they gradually lost something essential. They lost the ability to tune in, until eventually they became just passive receivers, broken antennas, repeating signals that didn't even know where they came from. Tesla saw that this cycle was about to repeat itself, and this time it would be global, because the Earth's frequency was changing, not by choice, but out of evolutionary necessity, as if the planet were a living organism, and humanity, cells within it. And now the organism was reorganizing itself, speeding up, forcing each cell to decide, evolve, or dissolve. And then Tesla saw something no one should see. He saw who was controlling the dominant frequency. They were not governments. They were not corporations. They weren't even conscious people. It was something much more subtle, much older, a form of parasitic intelligence that had learned over millennia to feed on the collective human frequency. She had no physical form. It had no name, but he had intention. And this intention was clear: to keep humanity tuned to a frequency of fear, scarcity, and separation. Because at this frequency, human minds generated energy, and this energy fed the parasite. Tesla understood, with devastating clarity, that most wars, conflicts, and human suffering were not accidental. They were cultivated, because suffering minds vibrate low, and low vibrations generate dense energy, and dense energy is food. But there was something more. Tesla saw that the parasite was not invincible. In fact, it was extremely vulnerable, because it could only exist in a specific vibrational range. If collective consciousness rose above this range, if enough humanity learned to tune in consciously, the parasite would lose its host. And without a host, it would disappear. That's why dissonance existed. They weren't villains. They were symptoms. Human minds so deeply tuned into the parasitic frequency that they became its agents, without realizing it, just acting, blocking, neutralizing, keeping the vibrational system trapped. And Tesla saw that he himself had almost become one of them. In 1901, when he lost funding for Wardenclyffe Tower, he spent months stewing in anger, resentment, and bitterness. And in that state, he began to capture destructive thoughts, thoughts of revenge, proof, domain. He wanted to force the world to recognize his genius. He wanted to make the world pay for rejecting him. And it was exactly at that moment that he realized he was being tuned by the parasite. The anger wasn't his. The resentment wasn't his. They were external frequencies that he had picked up because he was vibrating low. And if he continued like this, he would eventually lose himself. It would just become a conduit for this destructive energy. That's when Tesla made the choice that saved his life. He stopped fighting the system, and it began to vibrate above him. He stopped trying to prove his worth. He stopped seeking recognition. He stopped reacting to injustices. Instead, he entered into silence. And in that silence, reconnect heard with pure frequency, the creative frequency, to which it does not react. It just generates. And the more he vibrated there, the more the parasite lost power over him. In the following years, Tesla clearly saw how the game worked. The parasite couldn't force anyone. It just seduced. It offered power, recognition, revenge, justice, anything that made the mind vibrate in separation. Because separation is the frequency of survival, and survival breeds fear, and fear is food. But there was a way out, and this solution was so simple that it seemed absurd. Stop feeding. Don't fight. Don't react. Don't prove it. Just consciously tune into a frequency where the parasite cannot reach. And that's what Tesla did for 15 years, alone, in a hotel room, vibrating at such a high frequency that the entire system began to ignore it. Not because he was weak, but because it has become invisible to the dominant frequency. And it was exactly this invisibility that allowed the final discovery. 3 days before he died, Tesla saw the future. He saw that in 82 years, exactly now in 2025, the Earth's frequency would accelerate drastically, and millions of people would begin to awaken, not by choice, but by inevitable resonance. Like tuning forks starting to vibrate when a note is played near them. He saw that these people would feel exactly what he felt: confusion, loneliness, the feeling of not belonging. And many would enter into crisis, because the human mind, when it begins to tune beyond consensus, comes into conflict with everything it has learned to be. But Tesla also saw something hopeful. He saw that this time it would be different, because this time there was technology, information, instant connection. And this meant that awakened minds would no longer need to be isolated. They could meet, recognize each other, and together create a new collective frequency, a frequency based not on fear but on creation, not in scarcity but in abundance, not in separation but in conscious resonance. And this is what Tesla saw as the true revolution, not a war, not a fight, but a silent vibrational change, where every mind that learned to consciously tune in would become a transmitter, and each transmitter would raise the surrounding field, and gradually, cell by cell, mind by mind, the dominant frequency would change, and when it changed enough, the parasite would lose its host, and humanity, for the first time in millennia, would be free. Tesla saw all of this, and cried, because he understood that he wouldn't live to see it, but also because he understood that he didn't need to, because he had done his part. I had trained, he had crossed, he had recorded the message in the field, and now, in 2025, the message is getting through. People around the world are starting to catch on. They are starting to feel that something has changed, that a new frequency is available, and that the choice, to tune in consciously or to be tuned in by the system, is no longer optional. If you're feeling this right now, if something inside you recognizes this truth, if you feel like you have crossed a point of no return, so you are one of the bridges, one of the minds that Tesla saw in the future. And what comes now is the most important part: what to do with this tune, how to protect it, how to strengthen it, and how to use this frequency to create instead of being destroyed by it. Tesla died at 10:43 p.m. on January 7th, 1943, alone, in silence, but not in defeat. In his last seconds of life, he felt no fear. He felt relief because he finally understood that death was not the end of the relationship. It was just a change in frequency. And as her heart stopped, her mind did something extraordinary. It transmitted, not in words, not in images, but in pure vibration, like a last wave crossing the invisible field, an energetic signature so sharp, so crystal clear, that it would be recorded in the ether forever, waiting for ready minds that, decades later, would begin to tune into that same frequency. And when they did, they would get the full message, not as information, but as recognition, as if they always knew, but had forgotten. And now, 82 years later, that wave is coming. You may not realize it consciously, but something inside you already knows, already tuning in. It is already capturing fragments of the message that Tesla left. And if you've come this far, if you've heard this story to the end, it wasn't by chance. It was by resonance. Because the truth about mental tuning is this: you don't choose what you capture. You capture what resonates with the frequency that you already are. And if this story resonates with you, it means you have already begun to cross the veil. It has already begun to vibrate beyond consensus. You've started to see what most don't see. And now, you have a choice. You can ignore it. You can try returning to the old frequency. Pretend that nothing has changed. But Tesla discovered that this doesn't work, because once the tuning starts, it doesn't stop. Awaken goes deeper. And if you resist, the internal conflict becomes unbearable. You feel torn, lost, as if he didn't belong anywhere. Or you can accept it. Accept that you are not crazy, that what you feel is real, that the loneliness you experience is not your fault. It is just the natural frequency of those who vibrate beyond the collective. And that this solitude, in fact, is the portal. Because on the other side of loneliness lies true connection, not with the dough, but with other minds in tune, with the creative frequency, with the intelligence that organizes the universe. Tesla spent 15 years in this solitude, and it was there that he found everything he needed, not out, but inside, because you understood that true tuning is not about capturing external information. It's about aligning with the internal frequency that you always were, but forgot. And when you align with this frequency, something magical happens. The world around begins to reorganize itself, not because you're forcing it, but because you have become a field. And fields attract, reorganize, they create patterns. Right people start to appear. Impossible opportunities open up. Solutions appear out of nowhere, not by luck, but by resonance. Because you stopped vibrating at the frequency of struggle, of testing, of effort, and it began to vibrate at the frequency of the generation. Tesla called this the creative state, a state where you don't need to search. It just emits, and the universe responds. But he also left a warning that he needed to record in the field so that future minds wouldn't make the same mistake he almost made. The warning was this: never use tuning to control, because control is the frequency of the parasite, and if you vibrate there, you become it. Tesla almost fell into this trap. When he lost funding, when he was ridiculed, when he saw his ideas being stolen, he wanted to force the world to recognize him. He wanted to use his mental power to prove he was right, and it was exactly at that moment that he realized he was vibrating in ego, and ego is control, and control is fear, and fear is food for the system. Then he stopped, and he did the only thing that really works. He vibrated in pure creation, without expectation of results. And that's when everything changed. He stopped trying to save the world. He stopped trying to be recognized. He stopped trying to prove it. And it simply existed at the highest frequency it could access, day after day, year after year, until this frequency became so natural that he no longer needed effort to maintain it. And it was in this state that he passed through the final veil. And he saw the complete truth. The truth is that there is no separation. It never existed. Everything is a single vibrational field, and what you call I is just one point of attention within that field. And when you change the frequency of that point, the entire field around it rearranges itself to reflect it. Tesla saw that reality is not fixed. It's responsive, like a liquid mirror, and what you see in it depends entirely on the frequency you emit. If you vibrate in fear, you see danger. If you vibrate in scarcity, you see limitation. If it vibrates in separation, it sees enemies. But if you vibrate in creation, in creative silence, in pure frequency, you see possibilities. And possibilities, when held at a high frequency, become realities. That was Tesla's last lesson, the one that took him decades to learn, the one he recorded on the field with his last breath, and the one that is now being grasped by millions of minds around the world. Because acceleration has arrived, the field is changing, and the choice is before everyone. Tune in consciously or be swept away by the dominant frequency until you lose your essence. And if you're listening to this now, you've already made the choice. Maybe not consciously, but vibrationally, because your mind brought you here. And minds don't do this by chance. They do it for recognition. So now the question is no longer, why am I feeling this way? The question is, what am I going to do with this tune? Will you resist? Are you going to try to come back? Are you going to pretend you don't know? Or will you accept that you are a bridge? That you are one of the minds that Tesla saw in the future, that you came here at this exact moment in history to help shift the collective frequency, because that's what's happening. It's not theory, it's not mysticism, it's vibrational physics. And you, by consciously tuning in, become a transmitter, and each transmitter raises the surrounding field, and gradually, cell by cell, mind by mind, the dominant frequency changes, and when enough changes, the entire system collapses, not in violence, not in war, but in irrelevance, because there are no more minds tuned to it, and without tune, it just disappears. This is the revolution that Tesla saw, the silent revolution, the one that doesn't need leaders, manifestos, struggles, only for minds that decide one by one to vibrate consciously, and in doing so, they create a new reality, not destroying the old one, but just not feeding anymore, and you, now, are part of it, like it or not, know it or not, because you have already crossed the point of no return, already started tuning in, and the tuning, once started, doesn't stop. It just goes deeper. So take a deep breath, look around, and realize you are not alone. There are millions tuning in, millions feeling the same, millions crossing the veil, and together, even without knowing each other, they are changing the frequency of the planet. This is the truth that Tesla left. The truth he couldn't tell in life, but it was recorded in the field to be captured when humanity was ready. And now, you know that thoughts are frequencies, that reality is responsive, that you are not a victim, you are a transmitter. And the only thing that really matters is the frequency you choose to emit. So choose consciously, not out of obligation, but for recognition, because within you, there is a frequency that has always been there, waiting, and now finally you're starting to tune into it. And when you tune in completely, when you align with the creative frequency that you have always been, you understand what Tesla understood in the last seconds of his life. You were never apart. You were always the field, and the field has always been you. And now, you're remembering. And that memory, that tune, is what changes everything. If this message touched something deep inside you, subscribe to the channel, because this is not just a story. It's a calling, a call to minds that are ready. And if you've made it this far, you're one of them. And together, we are rekindling the vibrational field that Tesla left dormant in humanity. And this time, he won't fall asleep again. Because this time, there are enough minds in tune. And when tuned minds recognize each other, the frequency multiplies, And when the frequency multiplies, reality transforms. And the transformation has already begun inside you now.